So hi, I'm Sam Maddie, and like many of you, I grew up on the precipice of apocalypse. I saw An Inconvenient Truth when I was 5 or 6, I think, and
Oh,
it was we no, must have been more like 7 or 8, not sure, but and it was a formative experience. And since that age, I've been really, really concerned about climate change, as you are. But since then, because of kind of Neil or just straight out obsessively followed climate change news since a young age, I've noticed some really extraordinary changes and really just huge, major sort of global trends have started to shift in good directions. Like just for one example, and I'll just summarize it verbally and then lead into my slide deck. As recently as like 2010 through 2015, the IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, their worst case scenario, ICP 8.5, basically what happens if we continue burning coal and building coal plants through 2100, looked like the path we were on. And now, given how exponentially fast renewables are growing and how coal plants are being built almost exclusively in China, and even there, as we'll see, they're being less and less used. And now the ICP 8.5 path seems definitively avoided. Then again, some of the best case paths also seem definitively avoided. Well, as you see, we're nearing 1.5 Celsius, but there has been some extraordinary progress. And I feel that that's kind of the victory that does not speak its name, because no one has an incentive to celebrate good news on climate change, because given how big the problem is, people who care about climate change want to focus on, hey, still a whole lot of stuff to do. And people who don't care about climate change want to deny that the level was a problem. So I'm going to be focusing on just some publicly available data, scientific reports, and nation level energy reports that is all out there, but hasn't really been shared as a narrative by many people. And let me just pull that up.
yeah.
And
While you pull up your slides, I'm
that's
going
what I'm
to
doing. Yeah.
frame what you're saying a bit.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
that is that, it can get so depressing to think about
Yeah.
climate change that you can't go ahead. And it's still dreadfully urgent. But what Sam is telling us, I think, and this is probably your intention, is
We're
there's
making
enough
progress.
going on. There's a lot of hope, and we've got to just do what we can, right?
And not just hope in the rage at the dying of the light sense, not just we're still in this game. If we continue with the game metaphor, we have put a lot of points on the board. We have moved the needle substantially on the range of possible climate futures. And we've also really started. It's harder to measure stuff like this because it's not one sort of global metric like CO2 parts per million. But this header picture I have, is of a humpback whale surfacing with New York City in the background. Humpback whales have returned to the New York Bight and New York Harbor thanks to the Menhaden population coming back due to water pollution decreasing. So that's just another example of across the board, we are starting to really transition to a much better world with better human wildlife coexistence and cleaner energy. And there's still a lot of work to do, but the evidence is pretty clear. So this is just my newsletter, the weekly Anthropocene. Most of what you're about to see originally appeared there at sammaddie.substack.com. This graph from the International Energy Agency, and the story of how the International Energy Agency sort of moved from sort of a fossil fuel producers club to sort of a full spectrum, sort of all energy sort of recorder is a fascinating one, but not going to get into it here. Global CO2 emissions might have already peaked. And this focuses on the policy, but the major driver of this isn't just words on a page here. If this was just like accelerating what governments were pledging, it might not be worth a lot. Like, oh, sure, you're saying that your pre-Paris policy, you weren't committing to do anything, and now you're committing to do more each year, but what's it actually going to be? But we are actually starting to see that the substantial decreases in CO2 emissions are sort of the default now. Business as usual no longer means building out coal. Most of the new energy being built around the world is renewable. So yeah, renewables are set to contribute 80% of new power capacity. That's new electricity generating stuff being built worldwide to 2030. In the stated policy scenario we are currently on, 80% of new electricity generating stuff worldwide is renewables. In 2023, now 1 in 5 cars sold globally is electric. And in America, actually, it's essentially less than that. Like I think it's something like 10% as opposed to 20%. So, but globally, like in many countries, in much of the EU and Asia especially, electric cars have just begun to dominate the market. Under current policies, and again, this is not like everyone gets their act together. This is what we are on track for right now, based on current trends. Global fossil fuel use is expected to peak by 2025. And there's more uncertainty, but each major fossil fuel is likely expected to peak before 2030. And the International Energy Agency, and this was a club founded by Kissinger in the 70s to track oil production. This is not like an environmental NGO. This is meant to just provide information to governments on the state of the world energy market. Global investment in clean energy is now substantially outpacing fossil fuel investment, and the gap is growing. More than 500 gigawatts of renewables generation capacity are set to be added in 2023, and more than $1 billion a day is being spent on solar deployment alone. So this, we already have, there's already a huge centuries-long fossil fuel backlog. There's lots of CO2 already in the atmosphere, and lots of fossil fuel stuff already existing. But this is really substantial progress. And this has happened in large part due to some really amazing technology breakthroughs. A guy named John Goodenough from a university in Texas, I believe, invented a really good lithium-ion battery chemistry model in the 80s, and that's gotten better ever since, making possible everything from smartphones to grid-scale batteries, and a whole bunch of really cool technological advances have led to incredible price declines in solar and wind electricity, especially solar. Solar went from like unviable without massive support in 2009 to literally the cheapest way of producing electricity that humanity has ever invented in 2019. Basically, a miracle happened. Like, basically, sort of, we got a bit of a technological rabbit out of the hat that means we are getting big renewables growth without the kind of huge government intervention to make that happen we thought we needed in 2005. And we are getting some intervention with the Inflation Reduction Act, and obviously more would be welcome, but the economics are now starting to push in a good direction. And that is resulting in a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, just because we've gotten a lot of gloom and doom in this class, and I've certainly seen a lot of gloom and doom myself. Are you telling me, I want to emphasize this if it's true, you're telling us that this is energy that's already out there, energy that's already made the transition. It isn't some policy promise that those tend to get broken a lot. This is actual reality.
This is the thing. This is what solar costs in the market right now. Let me pull you up. This is a headline from the International Energy Agency, which again is not a green NGO. Solar panels currently are the cheapest way of producing electrons for use that humanity has ever invented. That has been the case since 2020, and that is why we're starting to win overwhelmingly. At this point, even a pure Machiavellian profit maximizing machine wants to invest heavily in renewable energy and transition their stuff to renewable energy, even if they don't care the least about the climate or human suffering, because it's cheaper. That is why we're winning.
That's profound. Yeah.
Yeah. And, you know, this is really honestly not really, I mean, arguably it's due to government intervention in an earlier stage, like research and development funding, like investments in the National Institutes of Science. Obama included some great funding for solar R&D in the 2009 Stimulus Act. There's been some great government support to make these technologies possible, but sort of, it's mostly due to the government supporting technologies, which then went on to become really cheap. Like, this is not really due to the Paris Agreement, which, as great as it is mostly kind of a talking shop, does not really have legal teeth. This is mostly due to technology and economics starting to work in our favor, thanks again to previous government intervention. So this is global battery sales, all battery sales. Like, the gray category there is consumer electronics, like the battery in your and my laptop. The yellow is stationary storage, like in the grid. The blue is passenger EVs, which you'll note have grown hugely. And this is why, like, this sector is moving so fast. And I have been obsessively writing a news roundup every week for years, so I think I might be able to see this a little before even some experts on this. That almost anything you've read about climate change from before 2020 is wildly out of date to the point that it's probably actively misleading. Because look at the exponential growth of this. Someone writing about batteries in 2018 is describing a completely different world. And it has changed in a good direction. This is from the Rocky Mountain Institute, which is one of the organizations, you may have heard of them, they're a major American energy consultancy. The Rocky Mountain Institute is one of the organizations really tracking this, and this is really, really impressive. This is really like a quiet revolution. This is astonishing. In my own hometown, the biggest battery grid scale battery facility in Maine is opening, and that would have been like a total science fiction just 5 years ago. So this is global installations of clean energy technologies from IEA report about their net zero roadmap. And this is, again, this is not pledges. This is not forecasts. This is not plans. This is what has happened on the planet you live on. Look at that.
That's great. I will throw a little cold water here because I want people to know the urgency and the full view. And that is that the atmosphere still hasn't equilibrated to the CO2 level we've got in it. And so we're still going to be going up, right? Yeah.
Yes, CO2 levels still going up. You'll note that these charts are not saying atmosphere is stable, everything fine. All still getting hotter. Last year was the hottest year in something like 125,000 years at least by glacial records. Like,
yep.
It is. My dad always says two things can be true. Like, it is hard for people to sort of keep that in their head because sort of social media and other things always want to simplify the narrative. But it is possible, and in fact, it is reality to be making huge progress on clean energy and for climate change to still be getting worse. Because clean energy is meeting currently almost all the new demand for electricity, but it's only just starting to cut into existing fossil fuel stocks and then replace them. So,
yeah,
there's still
that
a lot
reconciles things. Yeah,
but
good.
This is really clearly the way that the global technological system is going.
Yeah.
And again,
this is amazing.
Yes. Yeah, this is amazing. And this is like Vaclav Smil wrote his book, I think in like 2018. Look at where 2018 is on this graph. Fossil fuels look a lot more entrenched in 2018. Like a lot, like when I've given some similar talks about this before, and people just don't know this because if you're an expert and you're focusing on your field and your piece of the fight, your piece of the puzzle, if you took time out to focus on a really complex part of this problem for a couple of years, you've missed massive change, and that's not your fault. This is just like I'm talking to you in a general sense. That's just how fast things are changing right now. That we're seeing exponential technology growth. That has done some really incredible stuff. So yeah, global energy sector emissions, which is not all emissions, but is most of the electricity generating emissions, which is a large slice of emissions, are now expected to peak around 2025 and fall to 2015 levels by 2030. And again, that doesn't mean it's fixed. That's global energy sector emissions, not CO2 in the atmosphere. There's lots of CO2 already in the atmosphere and it lasts for hundreds of years. That's basically we're pushing in the wrong direction less fast. But that's still really good compared to what we thought we would have as of like 2005. And what this has added up to, according to the International Energy Agency and Dr. Catherine Hayhoe, author of many U.S. national level climate reports, is we have essentially cut in half the expected warming above the pre-industrial average by 2100. And 10 years ago, we were on a pathway to warm by up to 5 degrees Celsius, that RCP 8.5 pathway I talked about. And today, thanks to policies, and again, policies tend to actually track what is feasible in the market, not the other way around. Like there would not have been so many countries rushing to so many countries and US states rushing to institute stronger EV targets if EVs hadn't taken off like they have. So we are according to the experts I've read on the subject, currently on track for about 2.7 degrees of warming, maybe less according to the IEA. But like somewhere between 2 and 3 is still bad and scary and a big change to the world, but it's a lot better than 5. And again, this is where it's important to have some nuance here because we are currently at like 1.4 or less than 1.5, and that's led to all the wildfires and extreme heat and ecosystem changes you've seen. 2.5 would be bad, but it is important to point out that we are moving in the right direction. Well, again, that's a bit complex. Well, the energy system is moving in the right direction, even as the atmospheric concentration of CO2 continues to move in the wrong direction. But sort of the direction of change in adoption of certain key technologies is really good. And yeah, the number one reason why this is happening probably is that China has pretty much in the last like 2 or 3 years gone all in on renewable energy. China used to be sort of the big boat. And I want to be clear here. I am not a fan of the Chinese government. They do horrible, horrible things to the Uyghur people and protesters in Hong Kong and their own citizens and a bunch of other very bad stuff. But as with how the U.S. and the Soviet Union managed to collaborate for a little bit on some global issues like banning nuclear testing, it is really important that all sectors of that all parts of the world, even under authoritarian regimes, make progress on this. And China is really making progress on this. China is building truly unbelievably cosmically massive amounts of renewable energy. And that's like every sort of expert I read on this, like Bill McKibben, the climate expert, about this, it is hard to fathom just how much solar and wind is being built in China right now. China is on course to generate more electricity from wind and solar alone by 2025 than the US generates from all electricity, wind and solar and coal and gas and nuclear and everything. And so this map is China's planned large-scale solar projects, and this is their large-scale wind projects, many of which are offshore. So this accounts for quite a lot of those upward exponential graphs on like solar and wind and battery technology that you saw earlier. China, and this is just amazing, China's rooftops, so not like big solar facilities in the desert, China's rooftops added more clean energy than any country did in 2022. And other countries added quite a lot of clean energy. But like if the rooftops of China were a country, they would be the world leaders in adding all clean energy. Solar on rooftops in China is more than all clean energy combined for the entire West of any other country. Which, you know, other countries are also seeing growing renewable energy, but China's just on another level right now. So yeah, this is one of the major reasons that anything from like 3 years ago is really incredibly out of date in the energy sector right now.
How did they mobilize like that? Was it just a matter of economics or concern or what?
Excellent question. The book Climate Capitalism by Akshat Rathi, which just came out, has some of the first English language histories of this. It's actually a really fascinating story. There was this one Chinese engineer in the 70s who went to Germany and worked on early EVs and managed to sort of come back and convince the party hierarchy over decades that this was worth investing in. And he's now like Xi Jinping's Minister for Energy. And basically, China's authoritarian system has put all its chips on this number. Like China currently exports 95% of the solar panels used in Europe. Like China's not just building a bunch of solar globally. They are really sort of betting on this as their new economic model to be sort of the clean energy factory of the world. And that has also pushed the US to invest more in clean manufacturing with the Inflation Reduction Act so that the world doesn't end up dominated by China in this critical economic sector. So yeah, this is really huge. And this is getting bigger every year. And furthermore, China's still building more coal plants, but building more coal plants doesn't mean what it used to mean. This is a really good article by Dr. Hannah Ritchie of Oxford. Most of these coal plants aren't being used as baseload power, like coal often is, on all the time. They're being used as pico plants, only being turned on when on like, you know, night when on a still night on times when wind and solar power is low. Many Chinese coal plants are already losing money, and they're mostly being built for sort of local political reasons, like provincial sort of Communist Party chiefs have incentives to build coal plants to up like local jobs numbers and stuff. So most of the new coal plants being built in the world are in China, 6 times as many as the rest of the world combined. The US has not built a new coal plant since 2013. And most of the Chinese ones are being barely used compared to how coal plants are historically used. And, you know, obviously we should still be burning no coal at all. But 10 years ago, we thought China was going to keep burning coal as its base load power for the rest of the century. And it's already like shifting massively to renewables. So yeah, this is clean energy additions in China. Even in 2021, the situation was just totally different. This has just become absolutely gigantic. And this is what this looks like on the ground. So this is actually one of the smaller solar farms by Chinese standards. This is a solar farm forming the outline of a horse in Inner Mongolia. And many of these, for some of these solar farms, the best pictures are from satellites because you can't get all of it in even an aerial photo. This is a solar farm in Fujian, or part of one rather. This is one in Shanxi province. This is an offshore wind / floating solar hybrid project. Floating solar is emerging as the next big thing. The Netherlands is also starting to heavily invest in that. And you can see in the back, there's a whole bunch of other offshore wind turbines in the distance. And the world's largest wind turbine was installed at a 400 megawatt offshore wind farm in the waters of Fujian province on June 28, 2023. See that ship at the bottom in the bottom right corner? That's a really big ship. And these are extremely large wind turbines. 60 megawatts, that's like the size of a regional power plant. Each individual wind turbine here is generating a vast amount of power. So yeah, again, China added more solar panels in 2023, like the amount of solar panels they had at the end of 2023 minus the amount they had at the beginning, than any other country has in total. This is I would say one of the 5 most important facts about the world right now, right up there with like we're dealing with a major pandemic and stuff. This is like aliens observing Earth would notice that like a whole bunch of new stuff has been built in this part of the world. China's carbon dioxide emissions are likely to have peaked in 2023 thanks to all of this. China is increasingly doubling down on exports of its clean energy manufacturers, and they'll probably pretty quickly some trade wars as the US and EU try to just not buy all their solar panels from China and build up their own. But honestly, that's like sort of this is now moving to sort of the realm of geopolitical rivalry like oil used to, but it's doing that because it's now the center of the world economy. Like this is what a civilizational turn towards decarbonization looks like. And this is just my opinion, but this is growing exponentially. And I think by the 2030s, it will just be even more than it already is, the absolute default for how we get electricity. Fossil fuels will be legacy projects, which they increasingly are. And by then they'll just be, oh, we haven't replaced those yet? No one's building them. Solar's so cheap, we're only building solar. Again, right now, not policies, not plans, right now, 80% of new electricity construction in 2023 was renewables. And China, however, is no longer the world's most populous country. India, and another sort of counterintuitive thing, China's population is now decreasing. Their fertility rate's at about 1 child per woman due to years of coercive policies combined with cultural change. That's a whole long story. But basically, India now is kind of where China was in like 2000, 2005, a big populous country starting to develop and modernize and potentially have a huge emissions impact. But fortunately, India is adopting renewable energy much earlier in its development history than China is. And before we get there here, India is also really rapidly developing in a way that is probably going to help immensely with climate resilience also, because poor people are much more vulnerable to natural disasters. So this is the share of India's population with access to electricity. Again, gone from like around half in like the late 90s to almost everyone today. Percentage of Indians using the internet, 43% now, up from 7.5% in 2010, and nearing sort of the world average. And again, also, India tends to speak English, and people who use the internet in India very much tend to speak English. So a lot of the English-speaking internet is rapidly becoming from India, which is like China firewalled off their internet, and they speak Chinese. So there's sort of less play in the global market of ideas. But India is increasingly becoming sort of more and more interconnected with the world in a way that China never really was, because they had a Chinese-speaking and heavily censored internet. And share of the population not using improved sanitation, with no toilets, so to speak, went from over 79% in 2000 to under 17% in 2020. For a country of over 1 billion people, most people went from having to poop outside to having, at the very least, an outhouse. That is a huge improvement in human well-being. And I'm bringing this up because all of this is happening. This sort of major, like FDR in the 30s or China in the 2000s level of sort of modernization, this is happening with most of the new power generation capacity being built being solar. India has a lot of coal plants and some of the world's last sort of really old style, dangerous, open pick at the coal face mines, but most of those are historic now. There are some being built, but most of the new electricity generating capacity being built in India is renewables. And these were not my figures. Like I didn't come up with this. This is from like Reuters, Bloomberg, the Emble think tank, stuff like that. So and the sort of the thing with renewables is, because fossil fuels are still being burned, even sometimes the same amount or more fossil fuels is still being burned, because all those old coal plants are still there, and there's still some new coal plants being built, as you can see. Emissions can still go up, but that sort of hides the fact that all the growth is in renewables. And the emissions intensity, which is basically like the amount of emissions per amount of electricity, has decreased massively, because in India now there's lots more electricity and only a little more emissions because there's so much more renewables. And obviously, any amount of more emissions is bad. But this is, again, this kind of thing is part of the reason why I'm so optimistic. And again, I remember talking about satellite images. This is, as of right now, probably going to change in a couple months, the largest solar park in the world. And this is the scale of development we're talking about here. This is a NASA satellite image. India's not building as much solar as China. No one is, but they're building a heck of a lot of solar. So this is the kind of thing that's driving that massive build out. And also, incidentally, one of the things I'm most interested in is the leapfrog effect, where developing countries like India and hopefully soon Africa, and then hopefully soon many countries in sub-Saharan Africa, can sort of go straight from sort of free modern technologies to really advanced modern technologies that maybe even the developed world hasn't caught up with yet. Like classically, Africa will never have a phase where businesses use like landline phones and fax machines. Africa is essentially going straight where it's modernizing from no phones to cell phones. So India is kind of doing that with trains. They have 10,238 electric trains, and 94% of their rail lines electrified, meaning electric trains can run on them as of January 2024. And just 56% of the European Union rail network is electrified. And that's a country that has, that not country, yeah, supranational union. Let me slow down. The EU is big on trains, big on clean power, and because they're having to transform a legacy rail network rather than build one, as India is increasingly doing from scratch, they're behind India on electric trains. And that is part of the advantage of developing late in a world where solar power has already been sort of honed to a really effective level. And again, India also is seeing really, really rapid rooftop solar installations. And this is the 2023 numbers. And again, this is what's happening. This is not policies, not plans, not politician says this. This is people looked at the numbers and described what has happened. And the Indian Prime Minister is planning to, who's up for re-election shortly, is planning to invest $9 billion to install rooftop solar panels on 1 crore, a traditional Indian measurement, 10 million houses. So this is likely to go up even further in 2024. And this is
Sam,
again,
another question here. Rooftop solar, does it keep things cooler? Because I have friends who have relatives in India, and the Kim Stanley Robinson book, right? You're talking about heat deaths, and that was a pretty terrible problem. Does this help with that?
Yeah. Well, one of the big reasons it helps is that now you have electricity to run an air conditioner. Like, here's a counterintuitive fact about deaths. Like, which continent has the highest rate of deaths from extreme cold in the world? Open question. Anyone can guess.
Anybody want to guess? Which continent, I think he's saying, yes.
Which continent has the most deaths from cold, not heat, cold?
From cold, not cold, cold. Yeah.
COLD, as in freezing, cold, dying of hypothermia.
And there's a guess out here of Africa.
Yes, correct. It is Africa, despite the fact that Africa is not one of this planet's colder continents, because a lot of people in Africa are very poor. It is where most of the people remaining in very extreme poverty live. And the major risk factor for dying of extreme weather is being outside and not having like an insulated dwelling or an air conditioner or a heater or something like that. So people in what is overall a relatively warm continent are much more likely to die when there is cold because it's not developed. So, and actually another thing I wanted to point out, just sort of tangentially, it's not really in the main flow of the presentation, is that the number of deaths from natural disasters has actually fallen substantially in the last century, even though the economic damages have gotten worse because we've built more cool and fancy stuff, and stuff can't move out of the way or shelters like people can in the same way. But like the number of deaths from extreme temperatures, while horrible, and the extreme temperature deaths are increasing, is way lower than what the deaths from like droughts and floods used to be, because the world has gotten richer and more developed, especially in India and China. Most of these really big lines here are droughts or floods in India and China. And people are still getting their stuff often destroyed by extreme weather, but they're dying from it less and less. Like, for example, in Bangladesh, there was a cyclone in the 1970s that killed like 100,000 people. And there was a cyclone that hit almost the exact same area that was a substantially worse cyclone due to climate change in 2019, and it killed like 79 people. Because since then, Bangladesh had gotten a lot richer and they built storm shelters, and the world had invented like weather tracking satellites, so they knew the cyclone was coming this time, and they had organized a national alert system so people could move to higher ground. And there was a lot of damage, but a lot fewer deaths, even though it was a worse cyclone, because technology and societal resilience had improved. So, okay, and that's India and China. The USA has also made a lot of progress, and Biden has essentially done what has gotten passed with only 50 votes in the Senate in August 2022, a piece of legislation that is essentially a second New Deal in terms of its transformative effect on the American economy. The Inflation Reduction Act sets effectively unlimited federal tax credits for clean energy. Businesses can claim some money back on their taxes if they build or use clean energy. Individuals can too for some other things like heat pumps and EVs. There's a bunch of other stuff in that bill, but basically it's a big sort of hot wiring of renewable energy into the American economy through consistent federal support. And that has done amazing stuff. Oh, sorry, the spacing's all weird on that. America is rapidly developing a new battery belt stretching from Michigan to Georgia. This is the new clean energy manufacturing projects announced in 1 year since the Inflation Reduction Act's passage from August 2022 to August 2023. There's probably a lot more by now, with the investment in millions. Factories of batteries and electric vehicles are going up across the country. And a lot of them, incidentally, are in Republican states, which again sort of underscores the fact that this is not really a policy question anymore. This is an economic question. Like states where the government is active, where the governor or the state legislature or sort of the hard right is actively saying that like climate change is a liberal fake, are still producing vast amounts of wind and solar power. Texas actually now produces more solar power than California, despite the state government of Texas actively like attacking renewables and liberalism, and California actively supporting solar. Texas now produces more solar than California just because it's really, really a good deal. And there's a lot of windy land that people want to sell there's a lot of sunny land that people want to sell to solar companies, and windy land people want to build wind turbines on in Texas. And this is from Paul Krugman, the Nobel Prize-winning economist, editorial in the New York Times. And the chart's also from Bloomberg. Construction spending by manufacturers has more than doubled from June 2022 to June 2023. This is the construction spending by manufacturers in the US over the last like couple decades. When I was a kid in like 2008, there were like tons and tons of calls about the Rust Belt being hollowed out, all the manufacturing going overseas. We need to build back manufacturing. We just did. We absolutely just did. And it's barely being covered. Pretty cool. Mm-hmm. American lithium-ion battery manufacturing is on track to grow tenfold by 2027. We don't have a lot of local like lithium-ion battery exports, even though it was invented in America. Most of the development took place in Asia. So we're partnering with companies from allied countries like South Korea to build a lot of these new battery factories. South Korea's LG has partnered with GM to build a whole bunch of EV battery factories across a bunch of states. One battery plant in West Virginia is committing to hire United Mine Workers Association union miners for the vast majority of their jobs. And again, like we saw globally, it's about 80%. Clean energy, and this chart counts nuclear as a clean energy because despite its other controversies, it does not emit greenhouse gases substantially. Clean energy is absolutely dominating the new build of power plant capacity in the US. This is the utility scale generating capacity set to be built in the US in 2023. So this is from early 2023, but these things are kind of big sort of bureaucratic processes, and if it was at years in the making. So the final numbers for the year probably look very similar to this. And again, this is not a plan. This is not someone saying this is what we will do. This is what is happening. And incidentally, there are enough renewables projects currently proposed as in businesses sent an application to some state or federal agency saying they want to build it, enough renewables projects proposed to replace everything currently generating power in America. But there's a lot of obstacles still left. Like in particular, transmission lines will be becoming an issue. There's not enough power lines to sort of connect up all this new power, and it's hard to build new ones. There's some supply chain issues. There's a bunch of stuff. But these are the ones in this chart are the ones that have made it through from the proposal stage to the actual like shovel in the ground being built stage. And most of these will approve before the Inflation Reduction Act. So future projects will be easier to build. This is an analysis from the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, part of the Department of Energy, on the impacts of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law of 2021 and the IRA. So it's a lot. Their mid-case scenario prediction, mid-case, is that the US will have about 81% carbon-free electricity in 2030, up from 41% in 2022. Could be as much as 90% or as low as 71%, but it's going to be in that neighborhood, just based on the fact that almost all the new stuff being built is renewable and coal plants continue to be retired. And they expect the resulting emissions reductions to save 11,000 to 18,000 lives by 2030 due to reduced air pollution. And again, it is really important not to sort of boomerang back from everything is terrible to everything is fine, actually. There's still fossil fuel being burned. We are pushing in the wrong direction much less slowly, but still, this is really big. Much less slowly. Okay, got that double reversed or something. We are pushing in the wrong direction. We are accelerating less on fossil fuels. We are building more and more renewables instead of fossil fuels. So we're moving in the bad direction of fossil fuels less than we used to be, but we're still adding to the CO2 issue in the atmosphere. But still, this is a really, really good direction to be going. Biden administration is doing a bunch of other awesome stuff as well. How much time do we have, Leslie? So I'm just I have a bunch more to get through, so I'm gonna start speeding up a little more and summarizing more. I think.
And students like to talk with each other and have questions. Maybe this is a good midpoint to ask some questions before you then decide how quickly you need to deliver the rest of it. It is a long and really informative slide deck. I know that.
Sure.
Anybody have some questions here? We can pull up the guest chair and you can see him. You can see you. There went the door. Anybody, any takers here? Quick, oh, come on up.
Hi, my name is Ariella.
Sorry,
Thank you so much for being here.
I'm sorry, I couldn't quite hear you. Your name is what?
My name is Ariella.
Ariella. Okay, I'm Sam. Nice to meet you, Ariella.
Nice to meet you too. Okay, I'm gonna try to speak with my mask on. Can you hear it okay?
Yeah, just try to, enunciate and speak loudly. Because I was having trouble hearing you at first, but now I'm hearing you fine.
I'll back up, but I've got a mask on too.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it's really great to hear some positive things because I think so often in this field, it's just like a lot of doom and gloom. So thank you for that. And it's great to have it, backed up with facts and stuff. I think one thing I've been thinking about as you're talking about this is something that's talked about a lot in sustainability, particularly at Stanford, is like needing not just to make a sort of technical and energetic shift, but a cultural shift. And so I'm sort of wondering, like, yes, we need cheaper solar, et cetera, to make things happen. And it's great that it's happening. And like, I'm not denying that at all. Yeah. I'm sort of just like, what if in some hypothetical world, an even cheaper source of energy were suddenly discovered that were really emissions intensive or something, right? So like, how does one think about balancing the fact that like, yes, this is good. We need cheaper, clean energy, but it can't just be that it's cheaper. It also has to be that it's better. You know what I'm saying?
Well, I am personally really grateful that it's cheaper because I don't think we're going to get a cultural shift on energy. I don't think we're going to get a giant sort of cultural shift to value sort of energy's impact on health and the biosphere more than its price. But fortunately, I think we're going to get clean energy just based on price, despite that. So I would love a cultural shift to sort of really, really try to be sensitive to the environmental impacts of everything we do. But even the very, very small moves in that direction have provoked some really horrific sort of right-wing anti-environmental backlash. So I suspect that that is still going to be sort of a hotly debated part of the cultural wars, but sort of the ground under our feet will just shift in the favor of cleaner and cleaner energy. But yes, I would like a cultural shift, but I'm seeing a lot more progress on getting cheaper than sort of changing mindsets on how we should value our economy.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Thank you. And personally, I would much rather have tech getting cheaper but no cultural shift than cultural shift but no tech getting cheaper. Because one of those results in sort of the economics of the world just sort of churning this to happen based on self-interest, and the other one requires kind of constant political will and focus to incentivize and subsidize stuff. And again, we should subsidize stuff more. IRA subsidizing stuff is great. All these subsidies in the Obama administration made possible a lot of these tech improvements. But right now, economics are really the fundamental driver.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else got a question? He's clearly got his facts lined up. Yes, come on up. It's a long way.
Sorry, what?
He's sitting halfway back in the room and saying it's a long walk he's gonna have here.
Okay.
Here we go.
There we
So
go.
while we're waiting, this is the hey.
Hey,
What's your
Sam. I'm Uli. Good to meet you.
What was it? Willie?
Uli.
Uli, nice to meet you.
Good to meet you. My question was, how does China deal with the interconnection queue issues and the construction, I guess, backlog? And how do they build so fast if we in the US are not able to build it as fast? And we have, yeah, like how are they dealing with that issue, I guess?
Excellent question. One thing is they aren't really building new power lines as fast as they are. One of the things they're doing is sort of jumping straight to local battery storage, and they're also building a lot of pumped hydro. So part of the reason they still use coal plants is because they are not doing efficient power line connections between all these different sources of renewable energy as much as they should be. That's an issue with the way provincial governments manage infrastructure in China. That's a whole thing. But they've sort of walked around that just by building vast amounts and filling in with coal plants when they can't get renewable energy. Whereas if you had a really good sort of interconnection system, you could just sort of get renewable energy from somewhere else where it is currently windy or sunny. And they are building battery storage and pumped hydro storage, where you pump water uphill when there's lots of energy and then let it roll back down through turbines when there's less energy. So they're building energy storage. They should be doing more interconnection, but they're not. And part of the reason they can build so fast is because they're an autocracy, sadly, and because in the U.S. there are a wide range of very well-intentioned measures that allow ordinary citizens to have a strong say in a project, and often that means it's a lot harder to make a project happen. There actually have been some cases. A chapter of the Sunrise Movement, unbelievably, in Illinois, came out against a solar farm because it was taking up some space that used to be parkland or something, which again, reasonable debate to have, but the fact that that's even a debate is part of the reason why we build is part of the reason why we build solar slower. So the fact that under the National Environmental Policy Act, almost anyone can file a complaint or a lawsuit that it's not fulfilling its environmental impact statement. A bunch of our sort of legal and bureaucratic systems and kind of a litigious culture, I guess. The fact that projects can be tied up in lawsuits has slowed this down. Like, for example, sort of a classic example, Noah Smith article, Nevada Solar Mesa. A classic example is, and this is from sort of a business-centric sort of case trying to politicize it, but that the facts on the ground are that there was a solar power plant near Las Vegas that would have been the nation's largest. Since then, it's been outbuilt, but it was basically blocked because some local people really wanted to just not have solar panels on their mesa and be able to sort of go ATVing in the desert and not see solar panels. And from like a narrow self-interest case, you get where they're coming from, but you cannot really hold that view and then also say climate change is an emergency and we need to move really fast on it. So major solar plants get stopped by local lawsuits from people who don't want it in their desert. And that just doesn't happen in China. And, you can have a debate on that, but if you think climate change is a serious emergency, you got to prioritize the solar. And that's just, my opinion, but that is why. And this is, again, an example of what that looks like on the ground. Edwards and Sanborn Solar Plus Energy Storage Project, the largest solar battery storage combo in U.S. history, also the largest public-private partnership in U.S. Defense Department history. And this just came online this January. But like, this is now supplying a substantial amount of the electricity of the city of San Jose. It barely makes the news, but this is the kind of thing that all of those graphs are made of. Big projects like this happening in sort of out of the way areas that are suddenly producing a whole heck of a ton of electricity without emissions.
Awesome.
And again, this exists right now. Thank you.
Very cool.
Yeah.
There was another student in the room, cheering Uli's question as well. So,
and also, like, the comparison's kind of unfair. If China didn't exist, if that was just magically part of the ocean, we'd all be celebrating the huge American renewables build out, because we're also growing really hugely. But China's growing even more gigantically hugely than that, their renewable stock. So, like, the US is really substantially building out vast amounts of solar and wind and battery factories, especially since Biden's Inflation Reduction Act. But it is still less than China, because China's doing even bigger than that. But, the US is also moving in the right direction, just more slowly.
Cool. Anybody else have a question? You will clearly get a really good answer.
So Europe is probably is a lot smaller in terms of its energy market than China or India or the US, but is a lot further along the path to renewables, because they kind of started earlier in the 90s and even earlier than that, arguably, after the 70s oil crisis. So EU power sector emissions have almost halved since 2007. That's not all emissions. That doesn't include cars or factories. That's electricity, power sector, but still, half as much emissions for about the same amount of power. Again, not a plan, not a policy. What has happened? Continuing to move in the right direction. Very much so. Wind outpacing gas. Wind and solar combined about to outpace coal and gas combined. Again, already happening, not a plan, not a target. And also a key point here, as we replace other sectors of the economy with electrified stuff, like internal combustion engines and electric heat pumps replacing, like internal combustion engines replaced by EVs, electric heat pumps replacing oil furnaces, we'll need more and more electricity. So this is not like gradually conquering a stable territory. This is like speeding up and eventually overtaking fossil fuels for a growing thing. So this is why sort of renewables have accounted for a lot of the new growth, but have kind of flown under the radar a little bit. They're accounting for most of the new growth, and they're now really starting to sort of supplant some of the existing stuff. So yeah, continuing to go well. Current offshore wind auctions planned for 2024 in Europe. Offshore wind turbines also have been found in many European studies to be great for local ecosystems, because it's basically a new sort of stable surface in the water that stuff can grow on. So they rapidly become artificial reefs with like shellfish and barnacles and kelp and all sorts of stuff. And this is a much bigger, longer term trend, but land cover in Europe in 2010 versus 1900. This is land changes modeled. We didn't have satellite data back then. This is modeled off like historical land records. 1900. And see, this is sort of simplified to different colors: dark green for forest, light green for grassland, sort of beige for cropland, red for settlement. Versus 2010, substantially more forest, especially in Iberia, the Alps, the Baltics. So Europe has seen massive expansion of forest cover, mostly thanks to more efficient agriculture and the broader movement of most people from being sort of peasant farmers to being urban workers, which just means there's less land needed to do a larger, more efficient farms feeding most people. And again, that has led to a really massive rewilding of Europe. This is the percent relative changes in various wildlife populations in Europe. The abundance of Eurasian beavers has increased. The number of beavers in Europe has increased by over 16,000% from 1960 to 2016. In many cases, these percentages are so huge because they were almost extinct. So it's going from like a couple dozen or a couple hundred to like tens of thousands. So across Europe, across the rewilding continent, kind of furthest along on this environmental transition path much of the world is following, wildlife is zooming back. And that nicely leads into a rewilding Earth. The biodiversity crisis is a complex number and hard to summarize in a single number like you can with climate change. But because this is a whole bunch of species happening existing all around the earth, many things can be true at once. Like some studies have found that like insect abundance is decreasing in some areas, especially agricultural areas. That's caused a lot of concern. There's a lot of concern about a lot of species, but a lot of other species, sometimes even the same species, just in different parts of the world, have really started to rebound from sort of low points in the 20th century. This is just a quick map from a study pointing out species that are particularly helpful for stabilizing climate due to their ecosystem impacts. So this sort of ties in with climate change. And this is just a little sort of nifty graphic I came up with of some of the stories I wrote about in my newsletter that are most sort of striking about animals coexisting with humans. Because historically, you used to see sort of more wildlife in the countryside and less in sort of the coal-choked, polluted cities. But modern, more clean energy-powered cities with more park space and more friendly people, increasingly cities are more hospitable to wildlife than sort of farming country. And obviously sort of wilderness, wild forest or marsh or whatever would be more hospitable still. But urban areas are increasingly becoming more wildlife friendly. So yeah, this is a real photo, a pretty amazing looking photo of a very social media famous otter family in Singapore, Caracal in Cape Town, South Africa, Red-shanked dukes in Da Nang, Vietnam, critically endangered species, largest population lives in what's essentially a city park. Megabats in Adelaide, these guys are climate refugees. They flew into the city after drought really screwed up their original homeland, but they've been welcomed. The city set up bat guards on power lines. They prevent them from getting electrocuted and even hoisted up a sprinkler to tree level. Because, in the Anthropocene, which is this concept we're talking about, the age of humans, one of the major things that impacts wildlife's ability to survive is how much humans like them. Because in a rapidly changing, warming world, a little help from humans can really mean the difference between survival or not. And moving to cities sometimes means you get more help from humans, everything from like urban bird feeders to sprinklers cooling down bat colonies. And sometimes you get much more dramatic help than that. Wolves were reintroduced to Colorado in 2023 after a public referendum. Even in the global south, as in many of these examples, we're seeing substantial wildlife surges as pollution starts to get better due to the global shift to clean energy and sort of modern cultural trends tend to be more in favor of cute animals, as people are more likely to take a photo of them on their smartphone than hunt them for food. And sort of in more wild areas, not at all an example of coexisting in a city, but in the Kavango-Zambezi Transfrontier Conservation Area, much of Central Africa, that also is home to millions of people, it's a big mosaic, it found an estimated 227,900 African elephants. And elephant populations are declining in much of northern Africa due to poaching, but in this southern stronghold, they're actually slightly increasing since 2016. So again, that's due to strong anti-poaching efforts, protections. That's not the wildlife stuff, in my opinion, is much more precarious because it is due in many areas to sort of active human policies that need to be kept up, like anti-poaching efforts or like a city just allowing bats to live there. Like renewable energy kind of at this point has really, really, really strong economic logic going for it. So it will kind of continue to grow no matter what, but wildlife is much more dependent on sort of the human decisions at the moment. Tiger populations growing in Thailand. And this is a really interesting story. And this is all from my newsletter, the Weekly Anthropocene. I'll put the link in the chat. 2,000 southern white rhinos were being held by one kind of weird eccentric rich dude at a ranch in South Africa. And they got bought out by African Parks, a major NGO, and they're planning to reintroduce them all into well-secured national parks across Africa in the next 10 years. So that's a pretty big deal. Another example of European rewilding, I only did one of these because we had that big chart earlier. Only 5 brown bears left in the Pyrenees in 1991. 2 new ones were reintroduced in 1996. Now there's 76 brown bears in France. And brown bears are what we in America call grizzly bears. These are big wildlife coexisting in a very highly developed, urbanized country, in part because a lot of farmland is returned to forest and there's now more space. By the way, am I talking too fast? Shout out if I'm moving the incomprehensibility here. So humpback whales have really, really humpback whale numbers have really, really started to boom again since whaling was internationally banned, except for a few holdouts like Japan in the 1980s. there's observation of big sort of 150 whale feeding groups for some species near Antarctica that is similar to what was recorded before whaling. And that's all great news for climate action too, because they fertilize phytoplankton with their poop. There were over 212,000 sea turtle nests in Florida in 2023. And this is really interesting because due to a warming climate, a lot of the sea turtles are seeing really skewed gender ratios depending on species. But in many cases, that's a lot more, like over 90% of eggs hatched are females in some areas. But that's a lot better than the reverse, because even some males means the population will continue because females bear the eggs. And even though sort of the climate's becoming difficult for them, conservation efforts are starting to really pay off and result in substantial increases in sea turtle nesting numbers. So you get a lot of these contrary trends, like amid a changing climate, whether it's bats fleeing drought or sea turtles having like reproductive issues. Amid that, there's also more human support that gives them more of a chance to survive and adapt. World's first sperm whale reserve was recently announced off Dominica. The Saiga population, these cute antelopes in Central Asia, rose from 39,000 in 2005 to nearly 2 million in 2023, despite a major Saiga pandemic and bacterial disease in the 2010s. And the Biden administration is investing heavily in bison conservation in America. And this quote really, really shows how much sort of American and by extension world culture has changed on this. The U.S. Secretary of the Interior, in charge of like internal American public lands on which live many bison, basically said, let's kill all the bison to compel the Indians to surrender. The Indians here not meaning people from India, but Native Americans, as part of, the U.S.'s execrable atrocities towards Native Americans in the 1800s. And now, that was in 1872. And now the Secretary of the Interior is a Native American woman, Deb Haaland, appointed by Biden, and she is helping provide funds to restore bison to indigenous land. So that's a hell of a shift. Like that is one of the many sort of unsung victories of the Biden administration, and that is really, really cool. That makes me proud to be American. Colombia, since the Civil War ended in 2016, a lot of former militants have started conservation projects because they were hiding out in the jungle for a while and they know a lot about it. And gonna super summarize. I'm gonna try to give leave at least 5 minutes of presentation. Since the notorious Bolsonaro was replaced by Lula da Silva in 2023, deforestation in the Amazon has started to come down. Although again, like with the sort of renewables replacing fossil fuels thing, going less fast in the wrong direction. Still deforestation happening, but less than before. Dismantling illegal mining camps that were doing really, really horrible stuff in indigenous lands. Basically law and order in the Amazon. Bit more of that coming around. A few more examples. Now, this is a projection. This is not like the other chart I showed before, but Nigeria might be on track for a solar boom since they ended their oil subsidy. This is what's happening already. So rooftop solar capacity has increased hugely in South Africa, and their sort of national grid is really, really dysfunctional. So this is essentially citizens building their own sort of parallel grid. Really interesting. A giant oil spill disaster was avoided due to an international effort off Yemen. Really awesome story. Ecuador voted to not drill in a major national park. Pakistan starting to build back after some really terrible climate change-induced floods last year. And a whole bunch of really cool new tech is coming out. This is the thing I'm zooming out. And I'm just going to do like bullet points on these because we have a little time left. Enhanced geothermal could be the solar of the 2020s. Another amazing new tech company coming out. New battery chemistry that uses no lithium, cobalt, or nickel. AI can now discover battery chemistries on its own by querying existing databases at a level no human can. The kind of thing that is the reason why we're not going to starve to death despite climate disaster. Short corn. An extreme windstorm in August 2020 destroyed out 16% of Iowa's corn and soybean crop. You didn't notice because a lot of really innovative stuff is happening to help the world's food production be more resilient in the face of extreme weather. And short corn, literally shorter corn, less likely to blow over, is rapidly becoming the standard and is a great example of that. Decarbonizing shipping. This guy is the guy selling technology, so take it with a grain of salt, but he predicts by 2025, half the new build ships will be ordered with these high-tech sort of carbon fiber sails to help decrease their emissions. And probably pretty soon, the way battery tech's going, we'll have giant batteries for ships too in a couple of years. Electric flying taxis coming to a city near you, basically giant drones, electric airships. This one's essentially a billionaire's toy, but it could become a lot more. Hydro panels, self-contained solar panel device that gets moisture from the air, so essentially a self-contained water source like solar's a self-contained power source. Malaria vaccines, probably one of the 5 biggest facts about the world right now, up with China's renewables boom. Malaria has killed untold millions of people across history. Now we have a vaccine for it. That is going to save hundreds of thousands of kids' lives in Africa in the next, 10 years, and it will barely make the news. And again, malaria was one of the major considered death vectors of climate change, because warmer and wetter means more mosquitoes. So again, similar to the fact that, a worse cyclone in Bangladesh resulted in fewer deaths because now there's a storm warning system in shelters and stuff, worse disease conditions might result in fewer disease deaths because we're inventing some really cool vaccines. Sort of 2 things can be true. Again, yeah, same one. Cameroon started making this a regular pathway. And that is just the heavily pared down summary of the stuff I wrote about last year and early this year. Question time.
Yeah. Well done. Can you hear us?
Thank you.
Yeah, you can hear us. Good. Yes, you got a big round of applause.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I did not hear that, but thank you very much.
Anybody have more questions? I mean, I have huge thanks. This was a really needed, upbeat and well-founded, message here. Fantastic.
Thank you. Thank you. And the thing is, the fact that climate change is getting worse doesn't always linearly correlate to actual human life getting worse. Like that cyclone in Bangladesh example, or more malaria-carrying mosquitoes might shortly coexist with way fewer malaria deaths because people will be vaccinated against malaria. Human ingenuity can really substantially blunt the horrible impacts of a destabilizing climate. And renewable energy can help prevent that from getting to the worst of the worst scenarios.
Thank you. What a beautiful poem to innovation.
Thank you. Thank you.
Doing what we can do. Yeah, lovely.
And I would just encourage everyone to check out my Substack, sammatty.substack.com, for weekly news roundup on stuff like this. Most of this content is from my previous news roundups. And the full presentation link is available online if you want to just check it out more for yourself. I know you guys have questions, and I know there've been studies on the psychological effect of sort of questions and hesitation in rooms. So I'm going to just say, person sitting forward from the left in the first row, come up and tell me your first question. I don't know who that is. I can't see you, but I know you have one.
Okay, I see someone thinking about walking up. No?
Come on, go for it.
He's asking for any last questions. He knows you've got him.
Yes, exactly. That's hesitating. Say it.
Yeah. Leslie, can you ask him if we can contact him afterwards?
Oh, yeah.
Yes,
I
absolutely.
have his email, and he also sent me the whole slide deck. So, that'll be available in Canvas, right?
Yeah, actually, let me just can I share the screen of my own Zoom link? I would love to just share with you directly my email address. Not sure if there's a way I can put it up on the screen, but
there a second ago at ucla.edu, right?
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah.
At UCLA.
At UCLA.edu. Just gonna keep posting that in the hope it shows up on the screen. Yeah. Take a
You're
picture.
about to get help.
Yeah.
Okay. This is her laptop, and she will guide us through this.
Wait, yeah. So I put the key links and stuff in the chat.
Super.
Just,
That's great.
Yeah. Just select all on the chat, and there's a bunch of links to me, my website, this presentation, and my book recommendation in now. Not my book. I have not yet written a book, but I hope to. But the book that I most recommend on understanding these issues, Climate Capitalism by Akshat Rathi.
Yes.
So thank you all. You rock.
That was lovely.
Thank you so much.
And thank you. And again, it is not your fault that if you didn't know much of this. I have been obsessively tracking this week by week for years. the sort of zeitgeist hasn't caught up with this yet, but literally in 2023 alone, things changed massively. Anything climate related from a couple of years ago is woefully out of date.
Maybe I'll sleep better tonight.
Thanks. But yeah, like this is such a fast moving field. Like the amount and like in 2019, when Greta Thunberg sort of held the attention of the world, things looked a lot worse. Like things will legitimately looked a lot worse. There had not been this huge pivot towards renewables in China. There had not been the Inflation Reduction Act. There had not been some of the rapid improvements in battery chemistry technology. Like, it is really easy for people and institutions to sort of lock in on the last time they really researched something and go forward on that. And this is a really fast changing field. So things have changed really, really rapidly. So things are a lot better than they looked like a couple of years ago.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, this, for somebody who's been worrying about this since you were worrying about it, right? The same movie, the Al Gore Inconvenient Truth movie, that's a long time ago.
Yeah. And then it looked like the apocalypse. We were on track to keep building coal plants and drive temperatures higher and higher with no end in sight. Solar panels you saw on that graph were incredibly expensive. Now they're the cheapest there is. Things have changed hugely since then.
Yeah. Okay, lovely. And
thank you.
Anything else, anybody? Okay.
If you sign up to my free newsletter at sammatey.substack.com, you get news like this with delivered in your inbox for free weekly.
And the price.
Leslie is on it. Yes, there's also a paid subscription for some extra stuff, but the news roundup is free.
So yeah, cool. Thank you. Well, guys, it's actually time.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, you did such a. Oh, yeah, that's true. I could wait here. Thanks.
And remember, it may not feel like it. News is incentivized structurally to report doom and despair because that's what gets clicks and scales people and makes them come back for more. But we're winning.
Lovely. Thank you. Thanks, everybody.